Please help me welcome Heather Cartee.
Thank you, friend. Thank you so much. Sometimes you have things in your notes, and then sometimes you don't. And we were worshiping back there, and I just feel like I need to say this to somebody in the room because my kids came around me before I came out to pray over me. And some days I want to murder them, okay? So that's probably not where you thought that was going. But for the woman in the room who is just discouraged of wiping that bottom 100 times, or the woman who's in the room and maybe you don't have kids, but you show up to this Bible study that you help with or you set up for, and two people show up and they're not engaged, or to the woman who just feels tired and run down, I want to say to you, keep going because it's worth it. There is fruit if you will not grow weary in doing good. So keep going, sisters, okay? Yeah. Okay, Aaliyah. I wanted to introduce her, okay? Because some of y'all are like, who is this, right? And that's what I said when I was standing with my husband at Church of the City, and I looked down and this woman's leading worship, and it was like everyone else around me disappeared, and it was like, oh, and it was not just her voice, it was her heart. And I remember asking somebody, who is this? Like, we're always looking, like, who can we connect with, behold, and we're always looking with people, for people. And so connected with Aaliyah, had coffee with her, and I loved her heart right away because she said, hey, I'm not an artist. I'm a worshiper. I'm going to lead people in worship. If you want me to do a special music, that's not me. And there's nothing wrong with that, but like, that's just not my thing. And so I want to do that. Here's something really cool. I happened to be serving. We were serving at Church of the City for this thing, and I happened to have her daughter in my class, and she saw her mom on the screen in the class, and she was kind of her little daughter is young, and she was just kind of playing around, and then she looked up and saw her mom, and I said, Arabelle, is that your mom? And she said, yeah. And then out of nowhere, she looks at me. I think she's 3 or 4, and says, she has a call on her life. Of course, I'm like, yes, she does. She does. And she just goes on and plays. And so that is Aaliyah. That's who she is. That's the kind of person she is. And so the reason that she oozes Jesus when she leads us is because that's what she does in her personal life. It's just an extension of what she's been doing for the last 6 days today. And so we are so incredibly grateful. You can't find her anywhere on Spotify or anything like that. I guess you can visit Church City if you want to. We've got great worship leaders all over this town. But I wanted to say thank you to Aaliyah and to Maria, yes, and to April, to our band. I say this now because you're not going to listen to me at the end if I say that, but to our band, the really, really hot music director in the back playing guitar, that's my man. And all of our volunteers and the people who've been around, Sean and his great team, this would not happen were it not for those people. And some of them you won't see because they're behind the scenes cleaning toilets and making sure paper towels are stocked, or they're doing this, or they're rolling up this cord, or they're putting out this muffin. And so this happens because those people come alongside of us. So it's wonderful. I just want to say thank you to them. Yeah. Okay. If you have been to Behold before, or you know me and have heard any of my stories, I come from a small town in the foothills of North Carolina called Maiden, North Carolina. And there's so many fun things. Any other small town people here? Small town girls? Ring a bell? Okay. There's so many great fun things and unique things about a small town. And I could tell story after story. But one of my favorite things about my childhood was my dad. And still is my dad. And so the reason being is that when you live in a small town, you don't always get to have the amenities that we might have here in a larger city. For example, my dad is the father of 3 daughters, and he loves sports. And so when we were little, he said, you're going to play sports, whether you like it or not. And so he took us down to the local rec center, and I was the oldest, so I'm the guinea pig. And he says, "You're going to play softball." And I was like, "Cool." And so we go in, and they say, "Sorry, no rec softball teams for girls in this town." And he said, "What if I coach?" And they said, "Okay, we'll start a team." So my dad is responsible for starting the softball league in Maiden, North Carolina. And he started with a bunch of 6, 7, and 8-year-old little girls. So first practice, we're like, which side of the plate do we stand on? And do we hold the bat from this end or this end? You know, it was kind of like just a hot mess everywhere. I could just see people, I imagine that he was like, what did I sign up for? But one of the coolest parts of that experience was that he let us pick our team name. Okay, so we're 6, 7, 8-year-old girls. We kind of huddle up. We're like, what are we going to call this team? We don't know. And so we thought about it. We went back and forth, and then we came up to him and we had decided on a name. Okay, so I want to show you one of my pictures of playing with my dad. Right? Okay. As my boys would say, it was back in the 1900s. Okay. But the best part of the 1900s, the 1980s. Okay. And I want to prove to you that this name is real. So I took a picture of the trophy. We decided that our name would be the Magical Unicorns. Okay? Yeah, that was our name. Because what could be a more intimidating name than the Magical Unicorns, right? Okay. And I could just see my dad's face just drop. But sure enough, we had T-shirts printed, and the green one that I showed you earlier was not our Magical Unicorns. We ended up getting some sponsorships later from some local businesses, but we had a red unicorn on the front of our jerseys with our 3/4 length red sleeves, and it was just like, we thought we were amazing. First season, we had 12 games. We lost every game, except for the first one. The team showed up to play us with only 8 players, so they had to forfeit. And so we said, we won. We were like, yes, we won. First game, we stopped the game, but we played for fun. We stopped the game when they were ahead by 25 runs. If you don't know about softball, that's not great, okay? If you're losing by 25 and you've not had any runs. So anyway, my dad coached my team and invested in me from when I was 6, 7, and 8. And then when I got to middle school, I played softball. And he came to all my games, and he bought us like bubble gum and brought it to all the games. And then I was in high school. He came to my games. And then I went on to play a little bit in college. And it was his investment over time that had such an incredible impact on my life. But I would say this about my dad. If I had to use a word to describe him, I would and I will never use the word exciting. Okay? He's not dynamic. He's not thrill-seeking. He's not boisterous. He is consistent, solid, sturdy, reliable, and fruit-bearing. And if I'm honest, I want to be more like my dad. Now, why do I tell you that story? Because our theme this year is the garden, and I relate so deeply with Glenna in full transparency that sometimes the methodical pace of a garden just wears me out. I love you gardeners, but I'm with her. Let's go to Publix and get our tomatoes. I want to see immediate results. And from a spiritual perspective, I want my life to be the same way, filled with those mountaintop experiences, the giant slaying battles, the 10 commandment receiving, ocean splitting, maybe even a few fireworks in my life. Exciting, right? But I have never used that word to describe a garden either. Look at my exciting garden. So as we come to the end of the day, in my own flesh, I really wanted to bring this message that would make you, as my friend Brian says, go out and charge hell with a water pistol kind of thing, right? But I asked the Lord, where should we go? And I think he's led us to a different place. And I prayed and asked, and I quietly heard him whisper, meet me in the garden. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to meet the Lord in the garden. And we're going to look at 3 different gardens today. The first garden we've actually already talked about. And we find God first in the Garden of Eden. And Rebecca led us through this passage in Genesis 1 and a little bit of 2. And we met Adam and Eve there where they're communing with God. It was beautiful. You know how she talked about what life looks like and rhythms and things like that, and what we're returning to or wanting to return to. That was perfect. That was not marked yet with sin. but it was marked with presence and intimacy. God's presence and intimacy. He is fully known. And the Bible says that Adam and Eve were fully known and that they were naked and not ashamed. Now, as a perimenopausal woman, sometimes the naked part appeals to me because of my heat issue right now. I'm even thinking like, why did I pick a sweater? But the other part of the naked where you actually have to not have clothes on, I don't like that part, right? I think most of us would say I would feel quite ashamed if I were in front of anybody naked. And so I don't think it's necessarily that naked and unashamed in that sense, but it's definitely deeper than skin deep. It's communing with God, being fully known and loved. That's not a plug for Glenna's book, but if I could, I would right there. But at the deepest part of who I am, that's what I want. I want to be fully known and fully loved. That's where we find God originally, and that's before sin broke it all. That's the first garden. We talked about that. Second garden is Gethsemane, and we find God there. I want to read this passage to you, and I'll have it up on the screen. It's Matthew 26, 36 through 44. It says, "Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, 'My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.' Going a little farther, he fell asleep with his face to the ground and prayed, 'My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will.' Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. 'Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?' he asked Peter. 'Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.' He went away a second time and prayed, 'My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done.' When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. They could not stay awake." Now, where are my extroverts in the room? Okay. First of all, those hands just shot up and there were some woos. That's why I didn't say, where are my introverts? Because y'all weren't going to raise your hand anyway, right? You're like, I'm not raising my hand. I am an extrovert. However, this passage connects with me because I get sleepy at night. In fact, if you invited me to go out with you, my first question would be, where are we going? What's the parking situation? And then I'd say, when's it going to end? Because if it's going to be too late, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go with you because I know I'm going to get tired and I want to be home at a certain time. In fact, if we have plans and you text me and say, hey, we're going to have to change these plans, I might be putting my PJs on as your text is coming through because I am so excited that I get to go to bed on time, okay? So I can completely relate to that part of that. But my flesh in a deeper way is weak. I want my own way. And this is kind of what this is about. It's about Jesus saying, to the Father, not my will, but your will. But it's also about the disciples saying, my flesh is weak. I can't push through on this. It's kind of like food and eating plans. We talked a little bit about this earlier. Becca talked about this, but there are thousands of books on healthy eating or dieting or just how to get healthy. So if information alone were enough, we would all be healthy, right? But it has way more to do with some other things than it does just the information. One of the plans that has worked for me or that I like or that I gravitate towards is this idea that it's an eating plan that you would eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and dinner like a pauper, okay? Breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, dinner like a pauper. So big breakfast, smaller lunch, and then a really tiny dinner. That's all fine and good until around 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night when I know there's ice cream in my freezer and there's this voice inside of my head that says, "Long live the king." Okay? Because my flesh is weak. My flesh is weak. I want my way over his way. That's where we find ourselves find Jesus in the second garden. In the third garden, it's where Jesus' body was laid. Look at me at John 19:38-42. It says, later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now, Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly because he feared the Jewish leaders. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who had earlier visited Jesus at night. And Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with spices and strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid, because it was the Jewish day of preparation. And since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. Here we find Jesus in a garden, but it's in death. Jesus' body is prepared and it's laid to rest by his friends. But in addition to great mourning, which comes with death, his friends were mourning, they were afraid. They were hiding, and they were in despair because they were also experiencing the death of a dream. See, they had a dream that Jesus was going to come as an earthly king and defeat the Romans. But that's not what happened, and their dream died. So let's recap these gardens, and then we'll talk about, what in the world does this mean to me? Here's what each garden represents. Eden is presence invites intimacy. Gethsemane shows us Jesus saying obedience replaces rebellion. And then Joseph's tomb is where death gives way to life. And I want to ask you a question today. What garden season are you in now? I think we can learn something about the heart of God and what he wants for us in these first three gardens. And I love how Glenna taught us that we study scripture, not does what God say about me, but what does this say about God? What does this teach me about God's character? What can this show me? And then how can I apply this? And so Eden is our first garden. And I want to ask you, is God inviting you into his presence? Jeremiah 29:1 says, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." Now, I don't equate spiritual growth always with spiritual disciplines. And we talked about that, doing a checklist. And I do these 6 different checklists, and I read this passage and that, and then here I am, I'll be closer to God. Okay? So we're not doing this checklist just so we can get closer to God. But when you regularly listen to God and turn your ears to hear his voice, you're more likely to hear him. I've heard it said this way by a pastor: don't be surprised by the fruit that doesn't grow from the seed you didn't sow. So if we're not spending time listening to God's voice, then can we say, I'm so surprised that I'm not hearing from God? I don't think so. Maybe there is something prohibiting you from deeper intimacy with God or from walking in your calling. What is stealing your intimacy with God? For most of us, I don't even think it's big things. I don't even think it's this big issue with maybe a big sin that we have in our lives. I think it's small habits that we could change. We fill our lives with extras, extra screen time, extra work, an extra game, an extra event, extra. What if we fill that time with God? Last year, I did a digital fast for probably one of the first times. And if you've ever done that kind of thing at your church, you could probably relate. But what I realized is that how much time I spent on my phone. I mean, I see the nods because you're like, yeah, if you've ever done that, you do. You take your phone to the bathroom. Everybody takes their phone to the bathroom. I'm going to the bathroom, got to get my phone. And then when I didn't have it, it was like, where's my phone kind of thing. And I don't think it's necessarily the phone that might be our issue. But I do think it could be a lot of our issues. I had a friend this week tell me that she's programmed her chat GPT to ask her questions in the morning so she'll have someone to dialogue with. And so the chat GPT wakes up her alarm and then she just asks all these questions. Now, before we get all judgy McJudgy pants on her, right? Let me just tell you, this past week, I found myself in front of my kids yelling at Alexa because I thought the new upgraded Alexa sounded condescending. And I just said, hey, stop being so condescending, Alexa. I don't want your feedback. And I'm talking to this person, arguing with her as if she's like a real person, right? And so I'm caught up in this as well. I just don't listen. Periods of silence make me uncomfortable. My son is a sophomore in college at Lee University, and we went to visit him a couple weekends ago, and we went to his church. And at the end of the service, the pastor invited us. We didn't know what was going to come after this, but he invited us to all bring our phones to the altar and leave them there and go back to our seats. Now, first of all, I'm like, I don't know what kind of church this is, right? Never been to this church. I just want to check it out, make sure it's not some wild church. The snakes are coming out next or whatever. But I was like, do I do this? Like, what if somebody picks up the wrong phone? I started thinking, and I remember how, like, I did because it was kind of like peer pressure. And then I was like, well, maybe I need to do this. And so I walked up and left my phone. I'm kind of put it where near no one else's, and I'm walking away. But I had like this anxiety kind of well up in me of like, well, I don't have my phone. What do I do? And like, what if I need to bring it out for scripture? And we're worshiping, and I'm even distracted during the worship time because I'm looking at my phone. I'm still looking at my phone, up there. It's everywhere. And if I'm a betting woman, I bet that for a lot of us, this is what's stealing our intimacy with God. Maybe not. But if it's not this, what is it? What's stealing your intimacy with God? Because he invites you into his presence. Second, maybe he's asking you to walk in obedience instead of rebellion. Now, I don't think I've ever thought about Jesus being rebellious when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane necessarily, that he was saying, well, I'm not going to do this. But he's obviously the Son of God, perfect Son of God. He's not going to say, I'm not going to do this. He did ask, though, if there's any way that this cup can be taken from me, would you do it? Followed up with, but not my will, but your will be done. About a year ago, it's not been quite a year. This past year, we lost a dear friend, and she was sick with cancer, and once she got sick, she was gone within a year. She's a mom my age with 4 adopted kids. And from the moment we found out she had cancer, we began to pray that God would heal her. We regularly prayed that God would heal Stacy, asking him if there was any way, would he spare her life and not let those kids lose a mom twice? Wouldn't he do it? I don't understand why people die of cancer, why kids get sick, why marriages end in divorce, or why some kids have really crappy parents that mess them up for the rest of their lives. Why some people have perfect mental and physical health and other people struggle with physical illness and mental illness their whole lives. I don't get it. I'd love to tie a bow on that story and say, and then this happened, and then I felt this way, and it was all great, but I can't do that. I don't understand why God chose not to heal Stacy. I'm not smart enough or wise enough. I don't think I ever will be. But what I do know is that I can look to Jesus' example. What does the Bible teach me about the heart of God? And Jesus says, not my will, but your will be done. And so in times where I don't understand why he's doing or allowing what he's allowing, I can say, God, not my will, but your will be done. In what area of your life are you going your own way? And where is God calling you to walk in obedience? Maybe it's holding on to unforgiveness. We might need to do another conference on that one. Maybe it's choosing the easy road over the right one. Maybe it's numbing pain with lesser gods, food or social media control. Maybe it's self-sufficiency. I think this one is hard to recognize because it's often sometimes applauded in our culture. Here's a good litmus test. If I asked you this, When's the last time you've ever asked anybody for help? And if you can't remember, then it might point to the fact that you're leaning on your own self or on your own self-sufficiency. Because if you're not willing to ask others for help, you might not be willing to ask God for help either. Maybe you're engaging in gossip instead of speaking the truth. Or perhaps you're nursing a spirit of fear to the point it becomes a badge of honor. Maybe your mantra is, well, I'm just a worrier, I can't help it. Where do you need to turn from rebellion and turn towards obedience in your life? Maybe you find yourself in the third garden today where death is present. Have you experienced the death of something lately that feels like it's the end? Over the last 18 months, the Lord has taken me through somewhat of a death, a direction, and a plan that I thought was mapped out and completely, I could see the end of it was upended. And there were days that I had trouble staying afloat. I had deep, deep sadness, anxiety, and a low-level darkness present in my life. My life felt like the weather in Nashville these past 2 weeks. Can I get an amen to that? But here's what happens when something dies. Okay, my background is science, so I'm going to nerd out a second time here. I did history before with South Sudan. I'm going to do science right now. Okay, so when we think about death in a garden, that biblical metaphor of a seed is so present. So a seed doesn't necessarily die in the sense that we think of death, but as in it ceases to exist. But it has to be buried, broken open, and fundamentally transformed. So what does die are these things: the old form, the protective shell, and the seed's independent, self-contained life. Here's what dies: old form, protective shell, and the seed's independent, self-contained life. And then it's planted, the seed splits, the stored energy is consumed, and catch this, it cannot go back to what it was. It can never go back to being a seed. It will never be a seed again. It's not going to go back to what it was. The seed is gone, but life multiplies. John 12:24, Jesus says it this way: unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Jesus is not using poetic fluff here. He's naming a law of the kingdom. It's this: no burial, no multiplication, no surrender, no fruit, no death, no resurrection life. So what happens when things die? A seed must be released, not destroyed, buried but not abandoned, and surrendered and not wasted. So what does that look like? What does that death look like in our lives? What ways could God be calling us to die? Maybe it has to die as you imagined it. The dream has to die as you imagined it would happen. God, I thought it would happen this way, and it really didn't. Maybe it has to die to your control. Maybe it has to die to your timeline. Maybe it has to die to public recognition. Or maybe it has to die to being safe. I absolutely love the Chronicles of Narnia. It's just, I love reading those books. And so there's a scene, if you're not familiar with the books, where there are like talking animals in the book. And so there's this little girl named Lucy, and the king, a lion is representative of Jesus, and you learn that later. Spoiler, sorry. And his name is Aslan, and the kids don't yet know about him or know really a lot about who he is. And so they're asking this family of beavers who can talk, like, tell us about Aslan. And Lucy, the little girl, asking about Aslan, says, is he quite safe? And this is what the response is. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. And I wonder, for a lot of us, if we're like, oh, I can't let this dream go because I need to hold on to it. I need it to be safe. I need to live and step in a way that's safe, in a life that's safe. In God's economy, burial is not the end of a promise. It's the beginning of fruit. So what is God calling you to die to today? I want to take a few minutes and invite you into these 3 gardens and ask you, where are you today? Just as a recap, I'll put this back up here. Eden represents presence. God's presence invites intimacy. Gethsemane, obedience replaces rebellion. And in Joseph's tomb, death gives way to life. We're going to do it this way because we have time and we created space for this. When you leave here, life will be just as you left it. So we're not going to rush through this moment. We're going to take time and just let you spend some time with the Lord. And we're going to open this as an altar. It's funny, I visited this church one time. I don't know what background you're in, but I visited this church one time with my boys, and it was just my boys. My husband was out of town, and at the end of the service, I grew up Baptist, and so they had what we call an altar call, which if you don't know that, that's just where they invite you to come and pray, which is what I'm inviting you to do now. And I stood up, and my boys didn't grow up in that, and they grabbed me, and I started walking like, where are you going, where are you going, where are you going? I was like, I'm going to pray, leave me alone, kind of thing. And they were like so taken back. If that's you, that's okay. If you're like, we just don't do that, that's okay. You have, Jesus lives in your heart. You can pray to him there. You don't have to do that. But if God's calling you to do that, you got space. You can walk around and talk to him. We got space in this place to be able to do that. There might be somebody here that says, Heather, I don't know what you guys have been talking about all day. I don't know about this Jesus that you talk about. I've heard about him. We live in the South, which is kind of like Christian Disneyland, where you see it everywhere, right? But I don't know him. I don't know him. And let me just invite you into this as we have this prayer time. That in the Bible, Jesus says about himself that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father except through me. Now, the world would say, well, that's not inclusive. That's exclusivity. Like, you're not including everybody. And I would say, actually, that's the opposite. We want to include everybody. So instead of saying, well, there's this way, and that could be a way to God, and there's this way, that's the way to God, or you can go your way, and that's a way to God. Jesus said, no, there's one way. It's me. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. And no one comes to the Father except through me. And so he is so kind by saying, there's not all these different ways and you have to decide and flip a coin. Which one's best? There's one way. And he's inviting you into it today. And if you're thinking, is she talking to me? I am talking to you, right? Because this is your invitation to say yes to Jesus for the first time. And I'm not going to call you out or make a big deal about it, but when we invite you to pray, here's what I want to do. And if our prayer team is around, I do want to invite you to come over here to this side, because if you want to pray, all of this part of the altar is open around. But if you want somebody to pray with you specifically for something that you're struggling with, maybe you're like, I need prayer for healing. I need prayer for a broken relationship. I need prayer for a decision that I have to make. Then I'm going to have our prayer team here, and you just grab one of these ladies and they would love to pray with you. Or if you heard what I just said about the invitation that Jesus wants you to say yes to him for the first time, and you're like, that's me, then grab one of these ladies and they'll just pray with you. There's no magic prayer. The Bible says you confess with your mouth and you believe in your heart and you will be saved. That's it. That's all you have to do. We would love for you to do that. So we're going to take the next few minutes, and I'm going to let you pray, and I'm going to let you ask God, where do you have me today? Where are you meeting me today? What garden season am I in? And then we'll come back together in a few minutes. So the altar is open. Let's take some time to spend with the Lord. That third garden where there was death represented, that's not where it ends. Jesus, spoiler alert, rose from the dead, okay, and reveals himself for the first time to a woman. Mary, who is the woman that he reveals himself to, mistakes him for somebody else. Now don't miss this. This is right after the disciples and Mary found the tomb empty, and they're like freaking out maybe. And they think his body's been stolen or something's happened. And this is where we find Mary in John 20. The Bible says this, "Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, 'Woman, why are you crying?' 'They have taken my Lord away,' she said, 'and I don't know where they have put him.' At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize it was Jesus. He asked her, 'Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?' Thinking he was the gardener, she said, 'Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me, where have you put him, and I will get him.' And Jesus looked at her and said to her, 'Mary.' She immediately recognizes that it's Jesus in the garden and that he is risen. And he calls her by name. Mary is introduced to the risen Christ in a garden. Creation started and fell in a garden, and we find new creation and redemption in a garden. And here's the detail that is both subtle and stunning. Of all the people Mary could have mistaken Jesus for, she thought he was the gardener. That is not accidental. That is deeply, deeply symbolic. Scripture refers to Jesus as the second Adam, or the last Adam. The first Adam was placed in the Garden of Eden with a clear calling, tend to it and care for it, but he failed. Sin fractured that relationship with God, and the garden, as we know it, was lost. But now, in another garden, the second Adam appears. Jesus is the true gardener, not just of the soil, but of our souls. Where the first Adam brought separation, Jesus brings restoration. Through his perfect obedience, his death, burial, and resurrection, he tends what was broken and brings life where there was once death. Our verse for this whole day, Isaiah 61:11, "For as the soil makes the sprout come up, and a garden causes seeds to grow, so the sovereign Lord will make righteousness and praise spring up before all nations." Righteousness, right relationship with God and with others, and then praise. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Did y'all hear that part? Righteousness and praise. The enemy's trying to get after me. Okay. God offers us a hope and a new life beyond anything this world can give. A hope that doesn't just bring light, but drives out darkness. A hope that doesn't merely comfort our pain, but redeems it. The prophet Isaiah, earlier in that passage in 61, says it this way, that God would give a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. That is for somebody here today. These words were first spoken to Judah, to the poor, to the brokenhearted, to the captive, the prisoner, and the grieving. They were spoken to a specific people at a specific time. But hear this, they did not stop there. They were fulfilled in Jesus. In his coming, his suffering, his burial, and his resurrection. What was promised in exile was fulfilled in a garden. What was buried in sorrow was raised in glory. And today, my sisters, we stand on the other side of that promise. We worship not in ashes, but in beauty, not in despair, but in praise, not in death, but in life. So one more time, would you stand with me as we gather once more in the garden of life, the garden of righteousness and praise, the garden of Jesus.